Have you ever been so hungry that a tree started to look like food? In the world of the Middle Ages, hunger wasn't a temporary discomfort. It was a constant, gnawing force. It shaped wars, built kingdoms, broke them, and most of all, it transformed the way people ate. We often imagine medieval banquets as grand feasts of roasted meats and overflowing wine, but for most of the population, food was not about luxury. It was about survival. And when the harvests failed, things got dark. Tonight, we explore the top 5 most disgusting foods that were actually eaten in medieval times. Not as punishments, not as rituals, but as meals. Some were strange out of desperation. Others were strange by design. But all of them are almost unimaginable to the modern palate. And yet every single one tells us something about the world they came from. The desperation, the creativity, the belief systems, the hunger. So settle in, and maybe don't snack while you listen, because history is about to get unappetizing. Tree bark bread. Famine's last resort. Our journey begins in the far north, a place of long winters, frozen soil, and isolation, medieval Scandinavia. During times of famine, when crops failed and there was no grain to grind, villagers turned to the forests for their daily bread. Literally, they made it from trees. This wasn't some fantasy woodland recipe. It was a real practice documented in Sweden, Norway, and Finland as early as the 12th century. The method was meticulous, and it began with stripping bark from pine, elm, or birch trees, usually in spring when the sap ran thick and the bark was at its loosest. But it wasn't the rough outer layer they wanted. It was the pale, spongy inner bark, the phloem, packed with fiber, almost tasteless, and surprisingly rich in trace carbohydrates. They dried it, ground it, mixed it with whatever they had, perhaps moss, old rye, or crushed acorns, then baked it into dense brown loaves. It was bitter, gritty, sometimes slightly toxic if not prepared right, but it could keep a family alive for weeks. Peasants called it Nudberg, emergency bread. It became a symbol of scarcity, so much so that it was later ridiculed by aristocrats as pauper food. But for those who lived through those winters, it wasn't shameful. It was hope. Chewy, dark, wooden hope. The texture was rough, and the loaves often crumbled, but it filled bellies, and it turned something inedible, tree bark, into a lifeline. Some accounts even mention bark porridge, made by boiling the ground phloem with water and fat. It was a last resort, often fed to the sick or elderly. And sometimes it wasn't enough. People still starved with full stomachs, because bark couldn't provide enough energy alone. And yet, it was all they had. Even today, remnants of this tradition survive. In parts of Lapland and rural Finland, some artisanal bakers include a small amount of bark flour in dark rye bread, a nod to the past. A past where trees didn't just offer shelter, they were food.
Lampreys, the blood-sucking luxury. Next, we travel to the royal courts of medieval England. Here, behind castle walls and beneath banners of velvet and gold, lurked one of the most grotesque delicacies ever served: the lamprey. Imagine an eel. Now make it worse. Jawless, slippery, with a circular, suction cup mouth lined with rows of teeth. A parasite that feeds on blood. And now, imagine swallowing it. Despite their monstrous appearance, lampreys were considered a high delicacy. Kings feasted on them. Nobles fought to serve them on feast days. They were rich in fat and technically counted as fish, making them ideal for fasting days enforced by the church. King Henry I of England loved them so much, legend claims he died after consuming too many in one sitting. They were baked into pies, soaked in wine and vinegar, or boiled in spiced blood sauces. Their flesh was oily, their texture rubbery, and their scent often described as metallic, earthy, and slightly sulfurous. Preparing them was a gruesome affair. Cooks would slice the lamprey open alive to drain the blood for sauce, then carefully poach or roast the body. The result was a glistening coil of pale gray meat swimming in dark, fragrant liquid. Guests would cheer. Some would gag. Many pretended to enjoy it. To eat a lamprey was to show you belonged, that you had taste, that you could afford something that smelled like pond scum and looked like a nightmare. Even the preparation became theatrical. Some lamprey pies were decorated with sugar swans or golden crusts, hiding the horror within. Today, lampreys are rarely eaten outside a few small villages. Their populations have declined. Their taste has not improved. But in medieval kitchens, they reigned supreme. Proof that the boundary between fine dining and horror is thinner than we like to admit. The Cockentrice, culinary chimera of horror. Now let's leave famine and fish behind and enter the strange world of medieval food as theater. Behold the Cockentrice, part pig, part bird, all nightmare. Invented during the late medieval period and popular in English and French courts, the cockentrice was a dish made by sewing together the front half of a suckling pig and the rear half of a capon, or sometimes the other way around. The whole creature was then spitted, roasted, glazed in honey, and sometimes coated in gold leaf. The result? A monstrous hybrid of snout and feathers, meat and talon. Why? Because it shocked people, because it made them stare, because it showed off the chef's skill and the host's wealth. The cockentrice was less about taste and more about spectacle. Carving into it revealed a Frankenstein seam of bone, muscle, and stuffing. It was grotesque, impressive, and absolutely medieval. Sometimes variations included sewing the head of a goose onto a piglet, or stuffing a rooster inside a duck inside a lamb. The goal was the same: to confuse nature, to awe your guests. No one asked if it tasted good. That wasn't the point. This was food as a performance, a meal designed to be remembered, or to be feared. And in the glow of candlelight, with minstrels playing and lords laughing, the cockentrice would arrive, steaming, sizzling, golden and grotesque. Dinner with a warning.
Beaver Tail, religion's aquatic loophole. At number 4, we have a dish that wasn't born from desperation or spectacle, but from a loophole. The Catholic Church in the Middle Ages imposed strict fasting rules. On many days, meat was forbidden, but fish was allowed. And here's where things get strange. Beavers live in water. They have flat, scaly tails. They swim. So naturally, some medieval theologians decided the tail counts as fish. Problem solved. Thus, the beaver tail became a holy day delicacy across monasteries and noble courts in France, Germany, and Eastern Europe. It was fatty, rubbery, slightly sweet,
a kind of aquatic pork, rich in oils and incredibly chewy. Monks boiled it, roasted it, dipped it in sauces, and thanked God for the legal clarity. Theologians debated the classification for years. Some argued only the tail was fish. Others said the entire beaver qualified during Lent. Eventually, the consensus was clear. If it swam and it wasn't red meat, it could be dinner. This same logic allowed for barnacle geese, strange birds believed to grow from driftwood or sea foam. They too were declared edible on fast days. Science was young, the Bible was law, and if the world didn't make sense, it could be reasoned into shape, even if that shape was a sizzling beaver tail on a holy plate.
Stuffed cow udder, the forgotten organ feast. At number 5, we descend into the world of offal, the edible inner organs and less glamorous parts of animals. And few dishes were as revolting or strangely revered as stuffed cow udder. Yes, udder, as in the soft milk-producing flesh of a cow, skinned, boiled, and then stuffed like a turkey. This dish appears in multiple 14th and 15th century European cookbooks. In England and France, it was considered a delicacy among adventurous nobles and seasoned cooks who prided themselves on using every part of the beast. The preparation? First, you'd clean the udder thoroughly, then boil it until it was soft and gelatinous. Next came the stuffing: minced pork, breadcrumbs, eggs, herbs, spices, sometimes even raisins or chopped liver. Then it was sewn shut and roasted whole. The outer texture? Wobbly, spongy, slightly rubbery. The inside? Greasy, meaty, and dense. The smell? A mix of boiled milk and roasted fat, earthy and faintly sour. In some regions, it was served cold, sliced thin like terrine. In others, it was served hot and steaming, a collapsed white mound of quivering flesh at the center of the table. Why did they eat it? Because offal was cheap, and throwing any part of the animal away was unthinkable. But also because chefs wanted to prove their mastery, not just over flavor, but over form, transforming the grotesque into the grand. But let's be honest, even in medieval times, stuffed udder was considered challenging. It was more common in kitchens than at royal banquets. But it's in the records. And that means someone ate it, maybe even loved it. Today, it's virtually disappeared. Even in nose-to-tail cuisine, udder is rarely seen. Too chewy, too weird, too udder. But in the dim candlelight of a medieval kitchen with hunger in the air and fire on the hearth, it was meat. And meat was everything. Disgust is a luxury of the full. For much of medieval history, food was a battlefield, a test of faith, fortune, and imagination. The things we gag at today were once miracles. Bark bread saved lives. Blood soup fed families. Lampreys crowned kings. Even a stitched pig chicken became a symbol of power. What's disgusting is not just the food. It's what it reveals. That history is not sterile. It's messy, desperate, resourceful, and far stranger than fiction. So the next time you scroll past a food photo and cringe, remember that somewhere, in a cold stone kitchen, someone once picked bark off a tree and called it dinner. Sleep well and dream of steaming pies, golden chimera beasts, and parasite fish in wine sauce. Because the past was never clean. It was just hungry.